Hi patrons, how are you doing? Today we are going to paint a tree. Oh wow, we've been doing quite a lot of that, but this is the one where we're going to go into a bit more detail, and we are going to paint a tree with a little bit of sort of situ, but it's going to be sort of using up all the skills that we have currently got, having done the last few weeks of watercolour challenges. So I've got a pencil just to start off. I'm going to paint a birch tree. So I'm going to just give myself a trunk, and the tree I actually saw in the woods when I was walking had a sort of extra sort of double trunk thing going on at the bottom, so I'm going to paint that. So I've got myself a sort of pencil outline, and I would really love you to have a look around you and choose a tree that is maybe of a sort of moderate size, not a huge ginormous beech tree, unless you're feeling very confident with it. For your first go, I think doing a tree that's a sort of medium to small size tree would be sensible. So to start off with, I'm going to create a bit of sort of definition and surrounding for this tree by sort of painting a bit of an outline for it. And I'm just using, because it's autumn, some nice kind of autumnal shades in my palette. It just gives it a bit of context. And especially with a birch, which is a nice light trunk, it'll just help give even more sense of definition. And then towards the top of the trunk, I'm going to sort of just blend in a little bit more. Doesn't matter quite so much towards the top of the trunk, it's more about towards the bottom. So the challenge today really is to make a single tree the focus of our painting, because we've done them as sort of nice little icons. We've done a misty forest, we've done sort of close-ups of bark and bits and pieces, but what we haven't done is just gone, hey, here is a picture of a tree. So having given ourselves a little bit of interest in the background, I'm just going to add a little bit more, and I'm literally just sort of finding what is in my palette, and I think that's a really important thing to consider. I know a lot of you are very keen on getting the exact colours that I use, but also quite a lot of the time I love the fact that watercolour allows you to just make the most of what you've got lurking in your palette. So that's the first thing. And I also appreciate that some of you who are new to this might not yet have the detritus in your palette that I might have. But anyway, so the first steps to this challenge are to get yourself a vaguely drawn pencil tree and give yourself a very kind of faint background with just a little bit of interest, using the wetness that we learnt about when we were doing misty trees in the distance. And we're just going to let this dry and we'll get into the actual doing of the tree. Okay, that's dry. So now I am going to start putting in the actual detail of the bark and the tree. So for the silver birch, we did do a little bit of the texture and things, but also whether or not you're doing a birch, this will be really helpful. So crumbles come in again, but it's it's fine. So you may just hear Ant and Crumble negotiate their way out of the studio. Good boy, Crumble. Right, so I am using I'm using a sort of dilute combination of the shadow mix, and I'm making sure that there are little bits that stay unpainted, but I do want a general wetness because I am going to pop in some of those lovely marks that we learnt about last week. And of course, as well as this main trunk, we're going to have subsidiary branches, so we can start thinking about those as well. And what's really important about that background that you've just done is that it's nice and dilute, and it allows for your branches and your trees to not have to sort of be too overly done. So we're going to sort of continue filling out our branches. So I'm just sort of extending the initial trunk that I've drawn. But you will find as soon as we start adding leaves and things that you'll probably want to add even more little branches and stuff, but it's just good at this point to be having a little think about the sort of shaping of your finished tree, so where the leaves are going to fall. Let's get this second trunk in. Even though this is a fairly sort of loose approach, the tree is nicely defined against that background because we were able to do that nice wash leading up to a nice sort of clean line with the edge of the tree and the pencil. So make sure that you've got a photo to work from, or gosh, if you're able to sit outside or sit at a window and study the tree nice and closely, how lovely would that be? Okay, I'm nearly there with my initial branches. So far I've done all of this tree with the 2/10 brush, which is a very small brush, but it has worked really nicely because you can still get a lovely depth and thickness with it, whilst also getting the lovely spindly bits too with the branches and the fine line. I mean, to be honest, quite a lot of trees are going to look just like that in about a month's time, but for now, whilst it is the end of October, we need to add leaves. And I don't know about you, but outside my window at the moment, the colours are incredible. And I had never really appreciated that a silver birch, the leaves go incredibly fluorescent. So I'm just sort of extending the branches out a little bit more. And the other thing to notice here is I'm still working quite dilute in terms of the colour. I'm not going fully heavy in because the one challenge, well, there are many challenges with painting trees with watercolour, but one of the big ones is often you've got a big heavy trunk and tree, and then your leaves are usually a lighter, more delicate, sometimes translucent colour with the green or the orange or the yellow. So let's have a look at that. We'll just let that dry and we'll come back to it. Time to do leaves. So we're going to do an autumn tree. So we're going to have a combination of colours going on. So I'm mixing up my orange, my green gold, now which you could achieve a green gold with a combination of sap green and a lemon yellow or a cadmium yellow. Speaking of which, I'll get the yellow woken up, and then of course sap green. Okay, Now, judging from my window outside, it's sort of orangey yellow, then comes down to green. But the first thing we do is we need to get a sense of fullness with this tree. So I'm going to get quite a dilute orange on my brush and dab it off a little bit. And I'm going to start with a fairly large brush with a very dilute smattering of orange colour at the top, because that's the colour we want to see. I'm not thinking so much about where these leaves fall in terms of the branches. I'm thinking more about the outer shape that they are going to make, because we're going to do more leaves on top as a new layer, but we want to get a sense of the fullness of colour. So at this stage, these leaves are more blob-like to create this kind of halo almost that will be built up upon. So I'm going to mix in a little bit of green gold. Now, the other reason I think it's sensible for this exercise to try a mid-sized tree or a small tree is because you'll be close enough to see the leaves as individuals. Now, I'm not suggesting we're going to paint every single leaf in great detail, but I think it is important to be able to see the leaves on the branches rather than just a sort of big head of broccoli, if you know what I mean. Okay, so I'm also going to start bringing the colour down in the interior of the tree as well. Now, it doesn't need to be a completely sort of even and perfect halo of a tree. They never are they? So I want to make sure that I'm doing a sort of sense of uneven shaping, and that leaves sit where they want to sit. All the while, keep looking at your reference photo. I'm going to get a little bit of green now in here. And I'm using, to do this bit, a size 4 brush right now. But, you know, as we have talked about, we all have our own preference for the type of brush we like to use to do different things. So please do go your own way with the kind of brush you want. But the most important thing is that we're not spending too much time on this first application of leaves. Now we have a really nice basis of a tree, we can start to look at adding more detail. So I am making up a far more concentrated version of the mix I was using to create the tree branch, create the whole tree trunk and branches. And now I'm going to work sort of fairly methodically with branch by branch, starting to add more detail and a bit more depth and shadow. And then once I've done that, I'm also going to, actually I'm going to stick with the same brush, I like that brush. I'm going to start adding leaves that are a little bit more defined as well. Now this still will mean that there are going to be leaves floating around in the ether. I'm still not going to be a slave to adding every single leaf to every branch, but it's just starting to sort of help with the essence of getting this tree a little bit more defined. Now the leaf shape I'm doing is by taking the brush from quite a low angle, squishing it down and sort of flicking it away. And I'm also going to sort of achieve a bit of a blend of the colours coming together by using them together. It's such a wonderful time to do this kind of project because autumn is just creating brilliant colours. Now the other thing is, of course, the leaves that sort of sit over the front of the trunk, and these will sort of come as we sort of make our way inwards, but I don't want you to worry too much about them just yet. So I'm going to now work sort of up each branch that I've got and just extend out and add a little bit more depth and darkness. And start to fill it out. So let's keep going with that. Checking back in with you. You can see now I'm at the top of the tree creating some lovely orange shapes, and all the while thinking about building upon the branches I've got. Now one quite fun thing is to use what we've already painted in with the initial leaf wash, and almost having the branches tuck in behind those leaves will just help us when we're painting, and it makes it look like those branches are really integrated and not sort of struggling to dominate the leaves, because the leaves are being painted in a very translucent way, whereas those branches have been painted very strong. So if we actually give ourselves these gaps to paint those leaves in, it's rather cleverly giving us the impression that the leaves really are shielding the branches. We're also coming to a rather useful point where we can talk about the leaves sort of going over the trunk. So as they are sort of the greener leaves poking over, the main thing is not to worry about branches that are sort of coming out from the front of the tree, I suppose. We can add in little sort of snippets of branch if we want afterwards, but on the whole, using a slightly sort of more concentrated amount of paint, you can achieve quite an effective sense that these leaves are coming out from all sides of the tree. Okay, let's keep going. We're very nearly there, just coming round onto the home straight. And you can see that in doing that initial wash, or not, well, it was a wash, I guess, of the leaves underneath this slightly stronger version, we are getting a lovely sense of fullness without having to do all of the leaves at this level of detail. So coming down into this last little bit, we're going to finish off our leaves, have a little look at it as a whole, and then also prop in a little bit of shadow. which is one of my favourite things to do if you are following me on Instagram, which I think most of you are, because that's where we get the close friends stories and all the extra little goodies there. So with a slightly sort of stronger bit of green, just making sure we've covered over some of those branches. And I will just demonstrate sort of if we had a few leaves hanging down, then I would come in and add a few extra little branches. And that is true. If you wanted now, you could just check in and see if you want anything more in the branches. But I think that's a pretty lovely tree at the moment. Now, let's get a bit of blue and a little bit of brown to create a shadow. But I'm quite interested in maybe having a little bit of green in there as well, just so it's not completely alien. It's a good point about when you create shadow for something, you want to consider what that thing you're putting shadow onto is, and should you have a little bit of that colour in there. So just for some of these leaves down in the front, I like to add a bit of a leaf line onto one or two. Not too much, but it's just the ones that sort of catch your eye, really. Again, I'm all about suggesting detail rather than having to go all out with it. I just think it's much more expressive. So, and then just in the front here, help with a little bit of definition, because what you don't want is to end up with a sort of blob of leaves. So this looks lovely. One thing we could do now is I'm going to get a little bit more blue in there. I've got a really large brush and I'm going to just drop in a little bit more shadow here, but I'm also going to attempt to do a bit of the dappled light coming through that tree. So I'm just allowing for a bit of unpainted space, not got too much colour on my brush, or even water actually, and I'm just allowing it to dapple out from underneath. And then we could just add in a little bit there, because that shadow comes right down. And then I do like to just add a little bit more darkness to the shadow, just because really. Anyway, that will dry really nicely, and there you have your latest watercolour challenge. So what I would love you to do is to create a painting of a tree at this level of detail. So as I said, a small to mid-sized tree. First you're going to draw a very rough trunk, give yourself a bit of a wash behind, then think about how the branches are going to create the shape, and then from that how the leaves are going to help create the shape, and then start building up your layers and then end with a little bit of shadow. Okay, enjoy. I can't wait to see what you do. And until next time, thank you very much for your support.